Of course, my installer is calling me in the middle of the live. That's okay. Sorry, Tom, I cannot answer at the moment.
All right, everyone, welcome to episode 13 of WTF Live. I'm Kim from WindowWorks, and I'm joined with Vita from Vitalia Inc. And today we are going to be discussing trim and how to really dress up your window treatments.
And he's calling me again. I'm so sorry, Tom. I cannot talk right now. So yes, my name is Vita. I am the owner of Vitalia Inc., Window Treatments and Awnings. We are located in the Philadelphia area and service the interior designers and architects in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, South Jersey, as well as a little bit of the Delaware area. So if you guys are looking for support on any of your window treatment or awning projects, please reach out to us.
And I am Kim. From WindowWorks. We are located in Livingston, New Jersey. We service the New Jersey and New York area. So if you ever need assistance on your window treatment and awning needs, you can give us a call. We are open to the public, and we also have trade counts.
Very nice. And so today we are talking about embellishments, trims, all sorts of. Hi, Mary Beth. I'm so excited to see you here live. Hello. Mary Beth is a wonderful, such a great person, a friend and a colleague. She's a rep for Clarence House and Fabricat and that whole host of fabrics. So thanks, Mary Beth, for joining us. So anyway, we are talking about trims. We're talking about embellishments. We are talking about all the things that make window treatments even prettier and more beautiful and more special than they already are.
Yes, how to just really bring them up a notch.
And here, the first example that great, my installer is texting me about the problem that we were just talking about.
Do we want to take a pause and then we'll let everybody know we'll be right back?
Nope, there's nothing I can do at this point. The window treatments that were supposed to be ready, we're supposed to install them today. And they're not. The vendor has let us down just tremendously. So,
and there you have it right there.
Sometimes you have that, yes.
Yes,
and it's all evolving as we speak right here live. Isn't this great?
You guys are really
how am I handling it?
pretty well. No, you guys are really getting like a back, behind the curtain look of what really happens sometimes. The things that as a window treatment specialist and the ones who provide window treatments for designers and their clients and whatnot, there's a bunch of added layers, and it's not always you that's involved in layer, and sometimes unfortunately things happen. So we've all been there. I'm giving you a virtual hug, Vita.
Thank you. It's just, it just goes to tell you one more time that you can do everything right. I mean, this was a whole coordination of designer, customer, vendor, installer, us. I mean, it's like, imagine 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle and you have 999 pieces perfectly in place. It took you forever to put that puzzle together, and you've done your very best, and you were detailed, you were organized, you were systematic, you just did everything that you possibly could to make it happen. And there's just one little piece of the puzzle that at the very last moment today, as of 9:30 a.m. today, they tell me it's not ready. Again, information that could have been so much more wonderful yesterday. And yeah, the whole puzzle, the whole thing is out the window. And the domino effect that this one little puzzle created is just it's phenomenal in a most negative kind of way. But
you know what? Luann always has a saying when things like this happen. There's probably one point in the situation where if you look back and a week from now when you're not in it and you look back and you really start to evaluate and dissect it, it's like, what was the one thing that I could have done differently? And now for next time what, whatever the case is and what could have been done. But I mean, we've all been there. We have all been there that It happens. So
It does. It does, unfortunately.
so
Okay, so let's get the show on the road.
we
Enough
just
about our window treatment wars. Woes. Okay, what we have here is drapery panels.
we just need to switch it on Instagram.
Oh, we do, don't we?
Yep, there you go. Here we go. So everybody could enjoy the window treatments.
Okay. Oh,
There.
right here. Oh, thank you
Perfect.
very much.
Mazel.
Oh, guess what? Tom, our installer, has just joined me live. Tom, I could not pick up your
Hey,
phone.
Tom.
Hi. Because I'm here on Instagram and Facebook Live. No, the install is not happening. I did leave your boxer. I can't believe we're doing this live. Thankfully, there's only 4 people watching at the moment, but a whole lot more on Facebook. So I will talk to you in half an hour. So back to this. This was a project that we did for a great designer of ours. Her name is Linda Phillips.
Mm-hmm.
Interior design based here in Philadelphia. And these were pretty tall drapery panels, grommeted at the top, but at the bottom you see how she, I thought, was really, really creative in adding these rows of trim. And it's not, usually you see it down the leading edge or maybe at the very bottom, but what she has done here is asked us to put this trim about 20 inches up above the floor. And she has 2 different sizes going here. There's a thin trim at the top, then there's a wider trim in the middle, and again, that thin trim at the bottom. So I just thought this was really creative and really different in 15 years. I mean, we've seen pictures of this, but it is very rare that I've actually personally have done something like that. And it wasn't anything like the trim itself wasn't necessarily anything super fancy or creative in itself. This was just a very simple ribbon that like a grow grain type of trim, which is the term that's usually known to interior designers. But the way that she has positioned it in a thin, thick, thin 3 rows up above the floor, I thought was really different and creative. So kudos to Linda.
Yeah, it almost creates a pattern within the fabric by doing the 3 layers of trim there.
Yeah, it was really nicely done by her. Yeah, we just executed. This was not my design. This is totally something that she drove. And sometimes we help designers with the design, and we give them pictorial reference and ideas of what it could be. And this was all her, and it was really nicely done. She's a very, very creative designer here in the Philadelphia area. Linda Phillips, Interior Design.
Now, when you're doing something like this, because we've done stuff like this similarly in the past, when you're selecting the trim, just one little tip. You want to select a trim that's very flexible, that isn't so stiff. Because we've ran into that before where the trim was very stiff and it's meant to, lay flat and not really want to bend in with the pleats. So with that, it was causing the drape to hoop out almost. It wasn't laying, the pleats weren't laying, the way that the pleats are laying in this picture here. So like when you're selecting a fabric and you want to make sure the fabric lays nice and has a nice drapeability to it, if you're wanting to take this extra step and use trim, just make sure, play around with the trim and see how flexible it is. And so that this way, when we are creating the drapes for you, you won't have to tack them down and it won't be so much of an issue.
That's a really good tip, Kim.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so this next slide is actually a close-up of one of our displays here in our showroom. So if you haven't been to our showroom, the color palette here, if you see behind me, we have a lot of pinks and neutrals and things like that in the back of the showroom. And then as you go closer to the front, we get more into the blues. So this particular display is going over our staircase, the wall that goes down to our staircase. So when Luann and I were putting this one together, we knew that we wanted to use this fabric. It is a Marcus Williams fabric from Stout. And we loved the pom-pom trend that you see a lot now in the trims. But because there was so much blue, we were trying to figure out a way to bring the pink over to that side of the room so it wouldn't be completely ignored. Like, that's great, 3/4 of your showroom has a little bit of the pink, but how do you introduce it without pulling another fabric that has the pink. So we picked a just simple tape cord trim with a tape attached to it, so that this way we could sew it into the lead edge from JF. So it's actually two trims in one that we kind of created. So we first put the layer of the piping and then the pom-poms there to kind of break up all the blue and bring the pink over to that side of the room. So
it's actually two trims, right, Kim? And am I understanding
yeah,
this?
it's two separate trims. So we layered the trim. So this way you just have that nice little piping detail. It's almost like when you do like it's thin, like when you do like a self-welt, like on a cornice or a pillow. And we just added that, and we picked something purposely that was very thin. Yep. So it wouldn't be like, here's like we're overloading on the trim. Right. So it's a very thin pink trim, and then we had the pom-poms.
And I'm thinking from the fabrication standpoint, another good reason to pick something very thin is so that it doesn't create a lot of bulk in that leading edge. Because I'm assuming your workroom laid the face fabric, put the trim inside, and then hemmed it with either self fabric or something else underneath.
Yes.
The other
end. So you don't. That's another thing too. Great point. You don't want to pick things that are very thick. And if you are going to go with something like this, you want to pick a cord trim that does have a lip on it to make it easier to sew into the lead edge.
You know, that's so interesting. You know how many times I have received a trim, or mostly like the braid type of cord with no lip.
Yeah, so it's like,
I'm sorry, Mrs. Designer, but there's nothing I can do about it.
No, so if you want it sewn into some type of a hem or a lead edge, it must have a lip.
Yeah. On the cornice you can glue it on, but if it's a pillow or a drape, valance,
it makes it a little harder. Absolutely.
Okay, so this next picture is the project that we here at Vitalia Inc. did about a year or so ago. This is we call this a relaxed mock Roman valance. So what it means, relaxed is because it has that scoop at the bottom, so it's not straight. The straight would be called, we would call it tailored. The mock Roman is because it's made look as if it were a functional Roman shade, except that it's not moving anywhere. So, and once it's not moving anywhere, then it kind of automatically becomes a valance. So the shade is something that functions, the valance is something that stays stationary, but it's made look like a Roman shade, therefore a mock Roman shade. So a relaxed mock Roman shade valance. So a bit of a mouthful.
Say that 3 times fast.
The reason that I wanted to show it's got, as you guys can see, it's got very simple fabrics. There's 2 solid fabrics here, but what we did kind of differently here is that we ran the contrasting banding up at the top. Usually in valances, you see if there's any kind of trim, you usually see it at the bottom, and that's where it looks really wonderful, and that's a great idea as well. And sometimes I feel like we're forgetting about the top, and this is one of those instances where we said, let's not do it at the bottom, let's do something a little bit different. And so we always pipe our valances, our boards at the top, to just kind of give it that finishing touch and look. And then what we did, we ran the same fabric at the top of the valance to create, I think this was, I want to say like a 2 or a 3-inch band at the top out of the same fabric as the piping. So being that the valance itself is made out of a very neutral fabric, by running a darker, more contrasting fabric at the top, we really bring the eye up to the ceiling. And again, as Kim and I have said, I think probably multiple times, this nowadays with window treatments, it's all about lifting your eye up. It's going up. I mean, everything needs to be lifted. Window treatments, I don't know, person, whatever. It's all about lifting the eye. It's all going south, but you know, we're trying to lift it up.
So the top part, talk to me about that. That was created with a fabric, so that's not a trim.
Correct. That's all fabric. There are 2 fabrics here. I believe they're the same fabric in 2 different colorways. Exactly.
Yeah. So this is another way that if you don't necessarily find a trim that works and you want to add a little banding detail without it being like a band, like you could always add a solid fabric like this to kind of give it that detail. Okay, so this was a Roman shade that we made for Sarah Elizabeth Interiors here in Montclair, and she wanted to have this nice lightweight sheer fabric, and she wanted to just add a small thin little detail to the edge just to finish it off. So we added just a small thin trim along the lead edge and along the bottom. So it just gave it that sweet detail without it being too overpowering. Now, the one thing that I want everyone to keep in mind, you see how thin the trim is? It really works when you're working with a lightweight fabric. Now, if this were a thicker trim, let me show you an example of like a thicker trim here. If it was a thicker trim that you were going to put something like this, like a thicker trim. What happens when you put a thicker trim on a Roman shade like this is it adds bulk to the ends, and the ends tend to get a little thicker, and it might create a little smile there. So knowing that she wanted to add trim, we specifically looked for something that was thin, that wouldn't create that extra layer of bulk, that with the weight of the fabric would be consistent with the weight of the trim.
And help me understand, Kim, did you specify the trim, or did you help the designer specify
I helped the designer. Once she showed me what the fabric was, then we had that I had that conversation with her. I said, the thicker the trim and the wider the trim, it's going to create, it has to fold. So what happens with the folds on the ends is they'll fold, but the fabric will start to create a slight smile when we're going with such a lightweight fabric, because this Roman was lined with a sheer lining.
And that's such a good point that you're making, Kim. It's really important. This is for designers primarily. Before you kind of fall in love with the fabric and have the customer fall in love with it and the trim and embellishment, it's really a good idea to bring your window treatment expert person into the fold so that we can help you along. And there have been, most of the time it's just fine and there are no issues. But there certainly are those times, maybe 5–10% of the time, where the fabric isn't appropriate or the trim isn't appropriate. And at that point, you're in love with it, the customer in love with it, and we become the bad guys and we're saying, we'd love to do it for you, but here are the implications. It's going to pucker, it's going to grow, it will smile. And at that point, you don't have a lot of opportunity to kind of go back on the fabric that you've already fallen in love with.
Yeah, so those are just a couple of key things, especially if you're unaware and unsure. It's always okay to ask. I always say to the designers that I work with, just ask me. I mean, you can email me 100 times and that's not gonna, I'd rather help you ahead of time than it become, like you said,
a problem later.
A problem later.
Yeah. I very much like us to be in the process of kind of selecting. I mean, we don't have to be present for every single iteration of the fabric, but definitely in the discussion of what kind of fabric, what kind of trim, what sort of characteristics should the designer be looking out for when oh, ouch, when choosing it.
Exactly.
Okay. So what we have here is this is actually a Tieback curtain. You see a shower in the back, a bathtub. You're like, why is there a curtain in the bathtub? Well, here's what this was. This project was actually a model home. And if any of you have ever been to any kind of model home, it is very common for design firms to add a little bit of color and texture in the space that has a lot of hard surfaces. So next time you're in the model home, take notice. You will most likely see a very narrow panel, usually attached to the ceiling and kind of tied back like that. So you still have the whole shower or a tub exposed. You still see the tile exposed. It's usually done on the opposite side of the plumbing fixtures, because designers usually want to expose the plumbing fixtures because those are usually pretty, and kind of balance it out with a little bit of texture and color in the fabric. The reason I wanted to include it here in this presentation is the way we treated the actual Tieback piece. What I want to point your attention to are two things. Number one is the piping along the top and along the bottom. So it doesn't have to be a stationary shower curtain in the model home. Anytime you do a tieback, just add a 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch piping. That's how you would specify it to your workroom. And that just adds a really, really nice detail to your tieback piece. So that's number one. And then number two, if you're noticing the entire tieback piece, it looks pretty stiff. It doesn't have that fold and crease in the middle, which is what it would usually do under the weight of the fabric. The reason for that is because we add a very stiff piece of buckram inside, which prevents it from kind of folding and creasing onto itself. So you have the face fabric, then you have buckram in the center, and then you have the back fabric, which is also face. So you have 3 layers, with the middle being very stiff, and that gives that really nice straight, streamlined, not creased and not folding onto itself tieback. So a little tip there for you.
Okay. Okay, so this next project was one that we just finished up for Decorated Interiors for Campbell Minister. And what I wanted to show here is the bottom flap of the Roman shade. You can see that it is a little larger than normal. And that's because Campbell had spec'd this really wide trim. She really fell in love with this wide trim and she wanted to use it. But she also wanted it to be showcased so that when the Roman was pulled up, the folds weren't in front, like in the previous 2 slides where you saw how the Roman shade, the folds were sitting almost on top of that bottom flap, but because that trim was so thin, you could still see it. So with this one, I said, no worries, we can just make the bottom flap accommodate the trim. So this was also a case where she asked before, like, can we do this? And I said, yeah, we can definitely do this and we can definitely make it larger. That's the beauty part of going custom, is that we can specify how large or how small we want that flap to really be and to really showcase and highlight the trim. So it's just another design tip for everyone, that if you have a trim that is a little on the larger side and the wider side, don't be afraid to use it. You could really use it at the bottom of a Roman shade.
We call this piece of Roman a skirt.
Skirt,
yeah. Yep. So that's kind of like a little bit of a tip on terminology. So you can specify to your workroom, you can say, I want a flat Roman shade, I want it to be tailored, and I want the skirt to be 3.5 inches. And then you would also specify your trim. Your trim is also 3.5 inches, and right there, the workroom knows that you want the trim to be visible.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
Thank you. Oh, I know this trim. This is pretty.
Yeah, this was very pretty. So this is a drapery panel mounted on decorative rod and rings, and it has a really wide, again, talking of wide trims, and this trim is going down the leading edge. The leading edge is that the inside edge of the drapery. So if you have 2 panels in a pair, it's the 2 edges that are facing each other. So that's called the leading edge, because if they were functional, it's the edge that leads to close, or they're leading towards each other. So it's called the leading edge. And here we have very wide. This was probably maybe about 2, maybe 3 inches or so in width. So it's a pretty wide leading edge there. And we usually would place it just about 1/4 of an inch away from the very edge itself to kind of give it a little bit of a breathing room, if you will.
Exactly.
And then we usually start pleating as soon as that tape ends. So that's how we usually specify that. Another little detail that I want to point everybody's attention to is when you have wide leading edges like that, don't forget to specify an extra ring.
Yes.
So that ring at the very edge, at the very kind of corner of the end of the panel, if that ring wasn't there, that edge would be very droopy. And it would be very flappy. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Very pretty. I like how the proportion of the wide tape and then the kind of longer kind of pleat in there. So that's another thing too. You can play with proportions that way. So you have the wider trim and then the longer pleat. It just makes it look cohesive.
That's right.
Okay, so with this project, this was for Studio Aubergine for Stephanie Tamayo. This was a very simple linen sheer fabric, and it's kind of hard to tell because the picture is a little small, but this is 2 layers of trim, one on top of another. And what Steph created there was the client fell in love with the top trim, which was a trim that had studs on it, but it was a little on the thinner side. And this room is a pretty big, great room. And so in order to add another layer to the tape trim, she selected just a simple, lightweight, wider tape trim that we sewed the studded trim on top of. So before the showroom display that I was showing you, you saw how we layered the trim one side by side. You could layer trims one on top of another with tape trim. So that's another fun way that you could, especially if you find something that has a detail that's a little on the thinner side, you could always add something solid behind it just to make it look bigger. And it almost looks like it's one trim.
It does. I thought it was one trim.
No, it's 2 trims, yeah. So that's it's a little kind of secret detail that you can do there. I've even had clients that we were dealing with a bead trim or a fringe trim that the spacing between the trim was wider than normal, and they just didn't like, the spacing. So we actually doubled up on the trim so that this way we've cut the gaps. Yeah. A lot of times on sometimes with pom-pom trim or something, if the space is a half inch and they're just I'm really not feeling all the gaps. We're like, what if we just add another layer and skew it almost like you would do a brick pattern and whatnot. And so that way it cuts the spacing that way. So there's a
tips and tricks in the behind the scenes.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do with trim to really enhance your window treatments.
Nice.
Alrighty, everyone. So if you are new to watching, Vita and I have some free goodies for you on our website. If you go to windowworksnj.com, you can find Architectural Digest is coming, 10 things about custom window treatments. Luann wrote this free ebook. And if you're new to window treatments, I would highly suggest downloading it and reading it, getting all those tips.
And for my part here from Vitalia Inc., we also have a little gift for you. It's a free download lookbook. It's called 37.5 Window Treatment Ideas to swipe, steal, and make your own and to use immediately in your next interior design project. So just go on vitaliainc.com and download your gift for free.
All right. And for all things Luann and to keep up with Luann and to listen to the audio version of WTF, make sure you follow Luann on Instagram at Luann Nigara. You can download the podcast on all podcast platforms, or if you want to really dive in and listen to past episodes and whatnot, she has everything on her website. So it's luannnigara.com, and you can hit the podcast tab and you can search for all the previous WTF episodes right there. All right, if you would like to connect with me here at WindowWorks, our Instagram is WindowWorks, and then on Facebook it's also WindowWorks, and then for our email it's info@windowworksnj.com. Drop me an email, send us a DM, and we'd be happy to help you.
Wonderful. And if you are in the Philadelphia area, please be in contact with me. I would love to hear from you. Reach out to me either by phone or by email. DM me on Facebook or Instagram. We are Vitalia Inc. Vitalia_Inc. That's our handle on Instagram, or Vitalia Inc. Window Treatments and Awnings on Facebook. And again, if you're in the Philadelphia area and need support with your window treatment projects, we hope to be that right partner for you. So would love to hear from you. Thanks, Kim. Our communications director from ASID just said Vita is the best. Oh. Some days. I'm going to go deal with my install problem in a second. Hopefully I will be. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. come join us here every Friday at 12
Yes.
noon because, you know, if it's Friday, it's WTF Live.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining, everyone.